Awesome. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So it's really my distinct pleasure to introduce Dr. Ayuso. He's a current MIS fellow at North Shore in Chicago. He received his medical degree from the University of Texas at UT Southwestern Medical School. Sorry, I always get that name mixed up. He did his residency at Carolinas Medical Center. His top areas of expertise are hernia, diaphragmatic hernias, umbilical hernia, and foregut surgery. And he's going to be talking to us a little bit about how to find and get what you want out of an abdominal wall fellowship.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jenny. And I appreciate the AHS for inviting me to come talk about this. I think that this is a topic that is, obviously very recent on my mind as well. So hopefully what my experience people can learn from, and hopefully we can have some good question and answer at the end. Only disclosure that I have is that I love hernia. I'm really glad that we're at a point in time where we can be talking about this as, a type of training that's specific in postgraduate surgical education. So I think it's important to briefly kind of talk about, who I am, but also kind of my experience and how I got to where I am in fellowship, because I think there are some important lessons to be learned and just kind of gives some things to think about for people who are applying soon. So again, I'm doing a minimally invasive fellowship. We're doing a fair amount of hernia, but also a lot of foregut bariatrics and flexible endoscopy. So I spent 6 years before coming to Evanston at Carolinas Medical Center. And that's kind of really where I picked up the passion for hernia, not unlike some other people in this call. But spent a year doing research with the group there, and then had heavy kind of clinical investment throughout my time as a resident. So these are the types of hernias that I got accustomed to assisting with as a resident. So a lot of big revisional cases, loss of domain, predominantly open technique. We did a lot of open preperitoneal repair, and so by the end of my time there, I felt fairly comfortable with some of this more complex stuff, but I definitely felt like, where I was lacking was in the minimally invasive realm and wanted to kind of take that further. So I think, as I was gearing up to apply for minimally invasive, fellowship as a fourth year resident, I wanted to kind of ask myself, what are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? And where do I want to be? And so I think, one of the first things, as I mentioned, is that I wanted exposure as a fellow to a place that did a high volume of MIS repairs, right? I think that I want to be an MIS surgeon. I want to be an abdominal wall surgeon. And this is definitely part of the armamentarium for the right patient. And so, I felt like for me, it was very important to choose a program that was going to give me kind of new exposures, as uncomfortable as those might be at some time. And then I think for applicants out there, one thing to kind of, take home is though we're talking about training and hernia and going out into practice, a lot of the advanced training programs, fall into kind of one of four buckets. Most of them fall into multiple buckets. So hernia and abdominal wall, but also foregut, bariatric, and flexible endoscopy. And we'll briefly go over some of the kind of designations for specific types of programs. And so for me, felt like I had a pretty good foundation in hernia and bariatrics and wanted to kind of expand my horizons in terms of, going to a program where they did all four things fairly well. So there are two types of training programs, generally speaking, and essentially almost all fall into one camp now. So there's the Fellowship Council, which is the governing body that oversees fellowship training programs in minimally invasive surgery and complex GI surgery. And again, they kind of specify specific programs based on prior case volume, et cetera, to kind of, what their training really kind of goes into in more detail. And then there's this other camp, which seems to be dwindling a little bit by the year. So when I was applying, there's a handful of programs, the Cleveland Clinic, Penn State, Columbia. Those are the three that come to mind readily that were kind of outside of this fellowship council process, which is actually a formal match. And those programs, through word of mouth, through the internet, through social media, advertised their application process, and then you would submit an application directly to those programs, and they would invite you to interview. And then, if they liked you enough, they would offer you a spot to come train. But most of the advanced training right now kind of falls in the Fellowship Council domain. And so I think, a lot of people out there say, how do I know, what type of program is a program that I want to go to? And luckily, on the Fellowship Council website, there's ample information about all of this stuff. They have published information on case volume for the last 2 years. This is a sample case volume from Carolinas Medical Center, actually, Brittany Mead from last year. You can see that this is very hernia predominant, but on their website, they also have information about who's involved in terms of training fellows, their research productivity, other sorts of resources that might influence your desire to go to a program. So how do you get information on these specific programs? I think, first and foremost, you want to engage people that are going to help you throughout this process, right? So you want to talk to mentors that are the same people that are going to be vouching for you when it comes time to interview, and talk to colleagues that they're familiar with to kind of help get you to where you want to be. I think the most helpful thing for me, and Jana and Jenny and some other people on this call were really helpful for me, is talking to people who recently went through the process, because oftentimes they have the most up-to-date information about specific programs and their emphasis, et cetera. Obviously, there's more information online on blogs, but getting a part of societies such as SAGES and American Hernia Society is a really good place to start. So other things to consider besides case volume and the type of program are things that matter to us on an everyday basis, right? How close are these programs to your loved one? Who's going to be teaching you, right? And what's the stability of the program? Almost, on a yearly basis, we're seeing kind of droves of new programs to come in, and a lot of those, have a lot to offer and really are going to put a lot of focus on a new fellow. I remember interviewing with Dr. Shao at the University of Michigan, and it felt like they were really ready to invest in a fellow, that being a very recently kind of started program. But for me, it was really important to see that I was going to train from people that have been kind of around and doing things a long time, just because I felt that that's kind of what I wanted, as a fellow. And then stability is a big thing. Who's been the program director? Is there kind of faculty that are in flux? Are there new people coming in who recently graduated from fellowship? All those things are very important. So I wanted to highlight this, and Dr. Greenberg may be on the call later, but this is kind of an important new development in hernia training specifically. So looking at the specific designations that are granted by the Fellowship Council, this is the first year where there are programs that have a hernia or abdominal wall specific fellowship designation. And we expect that this will increase in the coming years, but looking kind of forward, depending on where you're at in your training, this is something to definitely consider when you're going out and getting fellowship kind of certificate if you want to be very marketable with certain job opportunities. But there's a basic case volume in terms of 100 cases overall that are split up to inguinal, ventral, and incisional. There's a certain amount of repairs that have to be done over 10 centimeters, and then an actual Fellowship Council hernia curriculum, which is currently under development. So it's pretty comprehensive, I think mimicking what is being done in some other parts of the world, where they're kind of giving more and more legitimacy to training in abdominal wall reconstruction. So I'm very excited about that. This year is kind of the pilot year, and so there are two programs that are participating in that. The Cleveland Clinic, Dr. Beffa is on the call, and then the program at Penn State, which Dr. Chang's affiliated with. But again, I think that a lot of programs around the country are going to be meeting these kind of requirements in the next several years, and I expect these programs to grow quite dramatically. So in the meantime, depending on where you're at in your training, if you're fourth year and you're about to apply, or if you're kind of earlier on in residency, the biggest things to think about are how can you build your CV, get involved with research and writing, and also I think the most important thing to do is just take really good care of patients. So you have people who are in your corner when it comes time to applying. I personally felt that the biggest things that had an influence on where I ended up and given me the ability to kind of do what I want were good relationships with mentors, and then B, research productivity. I think that's really just kind of a marker of your ability to get things done and finish as much as anything. So in terms of application, and this is for the Fellowship Council, Fellowship Council applications actually open later in the year. So in December to January is kind of the time where you're applying. And then you go through interview at places, and then ultimately it's a match process similar to residency, which occurs in June. And so that would be of your fourth year. You're PG by 4 year if you're applying kind of straight out. So kind of a recap of what I talked about: know yourself, know what you want, right? So there's some people that, they really kind of want to keep honing in on some of their strengths. People, I think like me, I felt like I had some kind of weaknesses that I wanted to shore up when choosing a fellowship. And so you really kind of got to know what you want and know what you want potentially in a job. And I think, kind of staying more broad, at least in my opinion, will make you marketable, though. There are hernia jobs all over the country now. Rely on available information and rely on other people, right? There are people that have done this before you, and I think those are the people that are oftentimes the best resource to kind of get you the information you need to get kickstarted. And then engage mentors, right? Not only to learn more about the programs, but to show them you're interested. And those are kind of conversations that will carry you to fellowship and even beyond with a job. And if you haven't already, start working on your CV. You can do that through involvement in societies, through research, and kind of other avenues that will let you kind of stay current and become part of the hernia community. I'm sure I can speak for everybody else on the call when I say that you can reach out to me at any time. So I'll hopefully can be provided with the email address, and happy to answer questions at any point. So thank you very much.
Awesome, great talk, Dr. Ayuso. It was really great to kind of hear your perspectives and what you thought about as you were picking a program. So coming up next, I want to introduce Dr. Sacco. She is an assistant professor and a minimally invasive surgeon and hernia specialist at the University of Florida, Jacksonville. She's also the associate director of her MIS fellowship. So really excited to introduce her as she talks about her transition to practice as an academic abdominal wall surgeon.
Thanks so much, Jenny, and thank you to the AHS for having this webinar. I'm really excited to share my experience with you all. So as Jenny mentioned, I am in my second year at the University of Florida in Jacksonville. I did my fellowship at Carolinas Medical Center, as Sully kind of alluded to, and my residency at Henry Ford Hospital in Detroit prior to that. These are my disclosures, none of which are relevant to today's talk. So I really want to break this down into three main components. I'm going to talk about clinical practice, talk about teaching and education, and research, which really are the three main tenets of any academic practice. So quickly, before we get into that, I do want to talk a little bit about finding the right spot and kind of how you find your jobs. I think that, can be kind of like a whole webinar on its own. But I think it's really important that you do find the right spot, and kind of similar to when you're choosing a fellowship, you have to understand what's important for you. So you really want to make sure that your values align with your partners, with the institution. Like wanting to be an abdominal wall surgeon in an academic setting, for me meant that I really wanted to do just abdominal wall surgery. I do a little bit of general surgery, a little bit of foregut, but my main goal was to do abdominal wall surgery. And for me, that meant going somewhere that valued that and, kind of understood it's not just a hernia, it is an abdominal wall practice that we're trying to build. And then I think whether you're in academics or private practice or wherever you are, your first year, probably the most important thing is supportive partner. And, you can be the best trained surgeon coming from the best fellowship, the best residency. It does not matter. You're going to need help. And even if that person is not, an abdominal wall surgeon per se, they're still going to be able to help you. You want somebody to run things by. You want somebody to be able to come in the OR and help you. So I think it's really important when you're initially meeting with people and talking with them, with the older surgeons, find out, what they do for their junior surgeons. And when you meet the junior surgeons in the program, ask them, how were you supported in your first year? What happened if you had a hard case? Was somebody there for you? I'll tell you, in my first month, my partner came in on a Saturday to help me do an ACS case. So those are the things that I think you want to look for. And then I will say that while you're negotiating things, if it's not in writing, it doesn't exist. It's kind of just like the medical chart. So anything that you're negotiating for, even if it can't go in your contract, the academic places are very, well, this is an academic contract, we can't change it. Get it in writing somewhere else. And that's, I think, goes for, again, all jobs really, not just academics. So kind of quickly talking about really diving into your clinical practice. And how do you build a practice? So you just finished fellowship, you feel like you know everything about hernia and you can come in and do everything. And on the other end, you're like super nervous and you're not sure if you can even, take out a lipoma. And that's where all that support system comes from. But I think in trying to build the practice is really just trying to get your name out there. And you need to do it within your own institution. The benefit of academics is that often you have some streamlined referrals from the academic institution that you're affiliated with, but you also want to get into the community. You want to get the other surgeons in the community to know who you are. It's a lot of really basic things like going out to PCP's offices, dropping off your card, saying hello, giving everyone your cell phone number. Anytime somebody texts me with a patient, I'm like getting them in the next day. Do whatever you have to do to really make it easy for other people to refer you their patients, and then loop back with them, right? So take really good care of their patients and let them know, hey, we did this hernia today, everything went well. Patient's doing great, or I saw so-and-so back in the clinic, they're doing awesome. And I think that's really important. You can get involved with your local, as much as, being involved with AHS is obviously great. And then you also want to be involved with your local, either county or local ACS. That's really how you can meet a lot of the surgeons. You can also use your reps. The reps are really helpful. They kind of know who out in the community is doing some basic hernia, but maybe doesn't want to do the complex stuff that you really want. And so that's kind of a really good way that I was able to build my name in the community and in the city and start getting a lot of referrals from our community general surgeons, which are the cases that I want to do. And so I think in the practice, you really want to make your identity really clear early, especially in the field of hernia, where we are still a little bit battling the fact that this is a specialty, and not everybody sees hernia and abdominal wall surgery as its own specialty. Make it known early. Sign your emails, abdominal wall surgeon. Sign your notes, like MIS and abdominal wall surgery. Really let everybody know that this is why you're here and this is what you do and this is your expertise. And then, like I said, ask for help. So that's where your partners come in, not just with your actual taking care of patients, but with growing your practice. They've likely been in the community for a while. A lot of the best introductions you can get are a simple, hey, this is our hernia surgeon. Send it to her, and I think that again goes to kind of choosing the right group of people to work with. And then, identify your goals early and let them be known. So for me, I really wanted to build a multidisciplinary practice with our medical colleagues, with prehabilitation and really good post-op care. And it kind of came in knowing that and just kind of make sure everyone knows it. It's not going to happen overnight, but if everyone at least understands what your goals are, they can help you achieve them. So again, this kind of talks a little bit about building that program. And for me, that was the best way to kind of get my name out. Was I got interventional radiology involved really quickly. Our regular radiologists, we started an abdominal wall conference, just my second month being there. We do that monthly now. I've worked with physical therapy and our pharmacists, our anesthesiologists to develop some care pathways. And so I think this is just a really good way to show the whole hospital that hernia and abdominal wall surgery is really a specialty and why you're doing this and why it's important. And it's, the best way to take care of our patients, I think. So transitioning a little bit into teaching and education. I'm our associate program director for our fellowship, which is not a hernia designated fellowship, but about a third hernia, a third probably foregut, and surgical oncology. So coming in and being super young, especially in your first year, I think it's really important to know what you can and cannot provide the fellows and the residents. And it's really hard because you want them to learn, you want to be that awesome teacher that you just had. But the reality is you're still learning yourself and you still need to do the case, and that's okay. So for me, I felt the best way to do that was to really set clear goals and set expectations with the residents and the fellows, before the cases, before the rotations, and give them certain tasks that they know they can do and let them do that. And, you can do the other parts, and that's okay. I think it was really hard for me at the beginning to accept that was okay. But it is, and it's something that you have to do for your own development and for the safety of your patients, right, when you're still first learning. And then I think what I tried to do is I really tried to add value outside the operating room. So, go to the journal clubs. I started this abdominal wall conference, really spend extra time teaching them outside the OR, or even while you're in the OR, explaining what you're doing if you're the one doing it. There's a lot of things that we can do for our residents, fellows, and medical students that are outside the OR and that maybe not everyone else is taking as much time to do. So I think they really respect that, and they respect your honesty. And you can actually provide, especially the senior residents and fellows, with that experience of what it's like to be a first year attending, and probably others can't. And it's something that they can learn from you, even though maybe you're not letting them do the whole case skin to skin. So then to kind of move on to the research side of things, research is really important, obviously, in academics, but it's very hard to just walk in and get started if you don't have a system already. So the biggest thing for me was really learning what resources existed. University of Florida is a big academic institution, so there's tons of resources, but there was really no one doing abdominal wall or hernia research. So I kind of had to start from scratch, and it was just really meeting all of the stakeholders. So meeting everyone from the Office of Research Affairs. I actually took a research class early on, and that introduced me to our Associate Dean for Research, and applied for an internal grant. And that has really allowed me to kind of get a research coordinator and really start our prospective database, which has been really great, because I think from research wise, clinical wise, the only way you're going to know if you're doing a good job and if we're taking good care of our patients is if we can track our data. But in order to track your data, you need manpower. So, there's a lot of different ways to go about that. And it's really just navigating the system and trying to see what small things you can do in order to grow into the larger things later. And then I just want to kind of touch on getting yourself a network, not just at your own hospital, but outside your network. A lot of the people on these pictures are actually on this call. They come from my fellowship, from my current practice. I have group texts with people. I call my mentors about cases all the time. Don't be afraid to ask for help. With the bottom picture is my partner and I operating, colorectal surgeon helping me with a really difficult case. So I think it's just really important to support yourself and make sure that you surround yourself with people who really want the best for you and are there to help you. And then the last thing is just trying to find that balance. I kind of like to split this up into two things, one being the work balance, which, is kind of picking, choosing your battles at work. You just got there. You're not going to fix the whole place in a day, and not everything's going to go your way. But try to, remember what your goals are and pick and choose the battles that are going to help you with your goals. And then the age-old issue of work-life balance, it's still important, and it's really hard in the beginning, because I do think it's really important to kind of be that yes person and say yes and participate in as many things as you can. But again, try to make sure they align with your goals. Make sure they're helping you achieve what you want. And if they're not, then say no and try to recommend someone else for that role. But really be true to yourself and try to do what's going to make you happy, make your family happy, and advance your career. So like Sully, please contact me. Hope to see many of you at AHS in a couple of weeks, and thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sacco. That was a really great comprehensive introduction, I think, to transition to practice as an academic surgeon. So next up, we have Dr. Chang, who's also a minimally invasive and hernia surgeon currently practicing at Penn State Health. So he's going to be talking a little bit about his transition to practice as a community abdominal wall surgeon.
All right, thanks. Thanks for the introduction, Jenny. And I think Jana did a great job of presenting the academic side of things. So hopefully I can provide a little perspective on the community side of things. Just really quickly, no real disclosures except for Proctor for Intuitive. That shouldn't have any bearing on this topic. And then, so just to start off, for those who are on the call that are really close to finishing training or just finished fellowship, you're almost going to be attending. Congrats. But, once you do become attending, it really becomes real. You know, you have real responsibilities, different stressors, and the buck really kind of stops with you. So with that, hopefully I can provide some more like practical topics in terms of making that transition a little bit smoother from being a trainee to an attending. So this is my journey real quick. I actually graduated from my MIS fellowship back in 2022. Started my job later that year, and then it was a really interesting, you know, situation because where I started, we didn't have any general surgeons. So me and two other partners essentially have had to build a general surgery practice from scratch. So I just wanted to kind of highlight some of these milestones, at least from an AWR standpoint so far, just to kind of give people a perspective of, you know, how quickly it took to kind of ramp up and do some of the more complex stuff as someone that has an interest in hernia surgery. So first ETAP case was later that year in 2022. First TAR case, RoboTAR, was in mid 2023. And then, you know, finally hit that milestone of like 100 robotic cases by that mid 2023 period. And then at the end of that 2023 period, I actually was talking to Dr. Pauli, and we had talked about, you know, joining the MIS fellowship faculty at that point. And then so it finally kind of became official later that year. And then I started working with the fellow at that time. And then earlier this year, you know, as my practice has grown, the really cool thing is I've been able to reduce some of my clinical referrals for non-hernia consults, so like pilonidal cysts or gallbladders, and then really hone in on growing my hernia practice. All right, so becoming an attending, I tried to condense it into a couple salient points, but essentially it boils down to, you know, attitude, how you build your practice, charting, your desires and goals, and then expectations. So starting off with attitude, um, I know that this is a very you know, comical reel that I found on Instagram, but you know, the type of surgeons that are highlighted in this fit all the stereotypes that we've all seen as residents or even as fellow attendings. And I wanted to highlight this because, you know, your attitude and how you present yourself, whether at work or outside of work, even, really establishes your reputation. And, you know, medicine is an extremely small world and word travels fast. So, you know, people will know who you are even outside of your own hospital. So it's really important to play well in the sandbox. So that means inside the operating room, in an outpatient setting with your clinic staff, and then also with your own partners and consultants. And I know this seems very, you know, common sense, but you know, there are a lot of people that we see day in and day out that don't or can't play well in the sandbox and then carry a not so positive reputation, and that actually ends up impacting, you know, whether people send patients to them. Because especially in a community setting, you know, your referral pattern is your lifeline. Unlike an academic center where you have a large network and you're kind of the tertiary care center, so everyone's going to send the most complex patients that way. In a community setting, you know, there's a lot of private practice, primary care doctors or specialists, and they can choose who they want to send it to. So if you have a, you know, negative reputation, more than likely people aren't going to want to send patients your way. And then, you know, just small things in terms of, you know, communication and how you conduct yourself as an attending, but really the details matter. So, you know, take the time to learn about other people, really have those human connections with individuals, whether they're OR staff or people that you run into around the hospital. Following up with PCPs, especially when they send their patients to you, whether it's forwarding your office note to them so that they know what's going on with their patient, or the postoperative visit note so that they know, hey, things went well. They're gonna, you know, be fully recovered from their operation. And then, especially in an inpatient setting where we have a lot of mid-levels now, I feel like a lot of the times they end up playing the middleman between their supervising physician. So when there are issues of communication regarding a patient care, reach out to the other specialists or the primary team and have a conversation one-on-one, because they really appreciate that, as opposed to, playing the telephone game and trying to hear information from your mid-level communicated to their mid-level, and a lot of stuff gets missed in between. All right, so then when it comes to building your practice, there's two really important people that you need to talk to when you first start out. So the first person I would say is meet with your practice manager. So this individual is extremely important because they are vital in setting your weekly schedule. So what does that mean? Basically, how many days of clinic do you want? Do you want half days or full days? And then they also work with you in building your OR schedule. So when do you want to have your OR block time? And is robot block time a separate thing that you have to look into? And some practices, they may even dictate, the call rotation or assigning holidays. So that's all important things to know when you first start. And then another important thing is going over the diagnoses you'll see in clinic. So as a community general surgeon, even if you have an interest in hernias, you can't just build a practice doing straight hernias from the get-go, or at least it's very rare to in a community setting. So you may have to, see diverticular patients. You may have to see pilonidal cysts. You may have to see gallbladder patients, and that's fine, because the busier you get from the beginning and growing your practice, the faster you can start focusing on, what you want to do as that grows. So the second person you really need to talk to is your OR service coordinator. So this is the person in the hospital that runs or is responsible for your service line. And it's important to talk to them because they help you build your pick sheets. So pick sheets are essentially your checklist for any operation that you're going to do. So they'll list out, positioning of the patient, what equipment you need, what to pull, what to hold. And this is really important because as you're doing this, you may find that the hospital that you're going to be working in doesn't have the equipment that you want. So this is a perfect opportunity to ask for that equipment. There's no better time than when you first start, because they really want to please you and make sure your first couple cases go smoothly. So ask for that equipment, and the worst they could say is no. And if they say no, they're a great resource to explain to you like what alternatives you have, because sometimes the equipment that they do have ends up being better or actually more useful than what you're used to. All right, so charting is probably everyone's least favorite topic. So, before everyone rolls their eyes like Stanley down there, charting unfortunately is, pretty much tied to your compensation. Doesn't matter if you're RVU based or if you're collections based, how you chart and charting appropriately will maximize the RVUs or compensation that you receive. So, you don't have to be a pro at charting, right from the get-go, but I think it's good to start talking to attendings now if you're a trainee, learning about how they bill, how they code their operations, because that's all important stuff that you'll be doing when you're an attending yourself. And especially if you're going to be doing specifically hernia surgeries, in 2023, there are new hernia coding guidelines that are good to look into because it really changed how we code hernias, and especially in the postoperative visits. And then final thing, be timely with all of these things, signing your notes, putting your admission orders in, doing your operative dictations, because being late with them does affect billing and reimbursement for the hospitals or your practice. And the last thing you want is getting hate email from documentation because you haven't, done any of this. All right, so the last two things are a little bit more philosophical, but I think Jana did a great job of covering this a little bit in her talk already. So really, your goals or desires, I think you can split into two separate categories. So you have professional goals. So what do you want to do? Do you want to hit a certain target RVUs? Do you want to work with industry? Do you want to take on leadership positions within your healthcare system? Or do you want to, teach or be involved with trainee education if there's that opportunity with your hospital system? In addition, there's a national level as well. You can join societies such as AHS or SAGES, and you can become an active member and participate in the numerous number of community committees that are there. But on top of that, you want to really kind of sit down and, look at your personal goals as well. Like being a resident is stressful. You're spending a ton of time in the hospital. And especially at least when you first start off as an attending, you definitely will be less busy. You're not going to be putting in 100 plus hours or 80 plus hours like you were as a resident. And so that means you have time to do other stuff like travel or spend more time with your family or take on hobbies that you didn't have the opportunity to before. And then just the last thing on this, medicine is a career where you have lifelong learning. So, I think it's important to attend conferences. For me, I like attending AHS and the Hernia Summit. Those are two conferences that I'd recommend. But you don't have to necessarily go to them annually. You can always go every other year or whatever your CME budget or schedule allows. And the other benefit of attending these conferences is they usually have courses where you can pick up new skill sets. If you didn't get something through training that you can learn, and it's usually very helpful, and you get to meet other hernia specialists and connect with them. So the final part of my talk is just setting expectations. So especially in a community setting, you may have to grind more than you expect. There's a lot of building your brand recognition and doing face-to-face encounters with PCPs or subspecialists, and that's part of the process of being a community surgeon. You want to make your name known out there so that people will send you their patients. And then just as a new attending, don't be afraid to fail. You're going to have your share of complications or things go wrong, but it's more important how you respond to that failure and whether you seek help when you need it. The last thing you want to do is just try to tackle on these issues by yourself, and then you kind of cycle and find yourself in a deeper hole than when you started. And then I think one of the most important things I've learned during this whole process is always give yourself more time than you think you need. And I know it's kind of vague, but it's in any aspect, whether it's seeing patients in clinic, how long you think it's going to take to do a case, because inevitably you are probably not going to be as fast as you think you are. So you rather, be the surgeon who finishes, on time or early rather than the person that's running like 2-3 hours behind. Because that makes a big difference, especially in the OR. So this final thing is, training, I feel like is like equivalent to Kramer here. You're barely inching across the finish line there, but starting and becoming a new attending is extremely exciting and a new journey. So just like Ralph Waldo Emerson, he says, life is a journey, not a destination. So just enjoy that process. All right, thanks everyone for listening. I just wanted to share this really cool picture. It's my family with a fellow who actually graduated a few years ahead of me, Dr. Nan Wu. She's out of Wisconsin. And I think it just reminds me that, you should value the relationships you have throughout this career, and it extends way beyond just the hospital or workplace.
Thank
All
you
right.
so much, Dr. Che. That was a really great talk, I think, about, sort of the realistic expectations of becoming a junior attending. It definitely brought me back to my first year in practice. I also have to say, you're like the king of memes. I'm gonna have to like hit you up for every good meme. I feel like you had so many of them in your talk.
Yeah, got to keep people engaged somehow.
No, it was really great. Okay, so for our next speaker, we have Dr. Beffa. He's an assistant professor of surgery who also specializes in minimally invasive and hernia surgery at the Cleveland Clinic. He's also the associate fellowship director for the Hernia Fellowship, so one of the only ones I think we currently have in this country. And so he's going to be talking to us about what do we look for in an applicant.
All right, thanks, Jenny. And thanks, Kitty and Ben, also for the invitation. Tonight, I just wanted to quickly touch base with everyone about what we kind of look for in applicants and as we go through applications. And again, I just want to kind of disclaimer this a little bit that this is just kind of one program and our thoughts, but I try to keep it relevant to what I think in general people should be striving to achieve. So basically, an application, you're going to have two basic parts to it, right? There's the application, which is what you see or submit in writing, and that's like your fellowship council stuff that you see and we get. And then there's the interview. And I just wanted to briefly go through each of those. The application and what this is really, really important. The first thing we look at, and I look at for every single application that comes across us, is I want to make sure you guys meet the eligibility requirements. And I know that sounds really dry and dull and boring, but it's super important because we get a lot of applications for people who are not eligible. And that's important because how you guys get paid is based off of our ability to bill for your services as a first assistant. And if you don't meet the eligibility requirements, we can't bill for you. And if we can't bill for you, you're not going to get any money, and nobody wants to work for free. So the first thing that we kind of quote unquote screen, I guess, for is do you meet the eligibility requirements? And just so that everybody knows, and I know a little bit about this, is that J1 visas, you cannot bill in the United States for J1 visas. So J1 visas are really, really hard to come into fellowships with because a lot of fellowship are paid for by billing for first assist. Not all of them. Some of them are paid through industry. So that might not be quite as big of an eligibility requirement, but at the clinic, a J1 visa is a pretty tough sell for us because we have no other way to pay you. O1 visas are okay, but they're harder to get. And I have no idea why an O1 can build and why a J1, I have no clue. I just know those two. The second thing I look at after I see your meet and eligibility is I look at your CV. It kind of gives me the first glance of like what you've been doing, what are your interests, how busy you've been. And then I briefly look through your personal statement, and I have a little asterisk there because it kind of gives me an opportunity for you to kind of tell me something interesting about yourself, which I think is fun. The only thing I'll say, it doesn't really impact the decision to offer an interview or not, but I do remember only the ones that are really, really bad. So as long as it's not super horrible, you're probably okay. The next thing I then look at are your letters of rec. And again, it's kind of like the personal statement. Most of them are very, very good, and they all say glowing things about you all. Otherwise, you end up asking for a letter. But if there's one that's really like on the fence or somewhat hesitant about you, that stands out. So make sure you're asking for letters of rec from people who are going to write good ones. And then the last thing I look at is your research and publications. And I want to kind of spend 1 second on this real quick because I think people get somewhat confused here. In our eyes, and at least at our program, we look at research in kind of a different lens, in the fact that if you're coming from a really high-powered academic center like Michigan or Cedars-Sinai or some really high-powered academic place, and you have no publications, that's going to be a little bit of a red flag for us. And on the flip side of that, if you come from a place that has very limited research, very limited resources and access to those resources, and you have one publication, that also stands out to us. So I just wanted to say research alone, we look at it a very nuanced view. And it doesn't mean you have to have 30 publications. You don't. And we don't expect that from you. But it does show that you're willing to go the extra mile. Particularly in places that if you have limited resources, even having 1 or 2 publications is super impressive. Okay, that's all I'm going to say about the application. Once you get to the application and you get offered an interview, we already know you're qualified. Okay, like you're already good enough to be here. Now it's just about basically a first date, right? We're getting to know you, you're getting to know us. Are we compatible? What do you like to talk to? Are you articulate? What are you passionate about? What do you love to do? It's just really more about kind of just getting to know you as a person. We get to know you, but equally just as important is that you get to know us. And that's really important for you as an applicant to know that you like us as well. And you're the other half of the equation. So I think in an interview, I would pay attention to how the staff interact with each other, how they joke or kid or talk to each other. All those things are really, really important. Okay, a couple of things that we just look for in general too, just to sum it up. And I know we're over time, so I don't want to go too much longer. Basically, we look for really hardworking people. And we want people who have very strong work ethics, and people who can start a project. Like, doesn't have to be a research project. It could be a quality improvement initiative. You could start a clinic for the underserved in your community, something that shows some initiative. And then also that's important is that you're able to finish those projects, that you get them across the finish line. You see it through to the end, or the project's ongoing or whatever. But we want to know that you can start something and you can see it all the way to the end. We look a lot for grit, and that's kind of hard to quantify, to be honest with you, but we often find it attractive in candidates who've had some type of difficult situation. They have faced some adversity and have overcome that in some way, or that has changed them for the better or whatever. But we like to see that in a candidate, because when you come into fellowship, it is going to be hard, and you're going to face tough situations inside and outside the OR. We want to know that you're able to withstand that. And this kind of goes with the first thing is just, our goal is to make you into the best surgeon you possibly can be. And we want you to want that. So we really want people who strive to be the best that they possibly can be. And they want that for themselves. And then I just wanted to say what's not on here. So as you notice, there is nothing about your technical ability on any of this list. And that is not anything that we look for in candidates. That's not really coming into it what we want to evaluate. That our job as a fellowship staff is to make you technically excellent. So you don't have to have those skill sets coming in. It's our job to provide you those skill sets and make you into that surgeon that's technically the best that we can possibly make you. What we look for is the framework there within you to tolerate that type of training to mold you into the surgeon that we know you can be. And so that's really what we look for in applicants. And I just want to end, last thing is just have fun. This is a once in a lifetime opportunity for you to interview. You're going to meet and interact with surgeons that are highly published and are well known, and you probably would never have crossed paths with in the past or maybe even the future. So have fun with it. I'm looking forward to seeing any of you guys' applications come across our desk. And I'm going to leave you with my email. So please just feel free to email me or reach out to me in any capacity with any questions at all. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Dr. Baffa. I realized that after introducing everybody that there's a lot of fellowship leadership here on the panel tonight, so it's really great to have everyone here. So our last speaker tonight's supposed to be Dr. Greenberg, but he actually had to do an emergency case, so will not be here, but he did send me a slide, so I can hopefully just do a quick update from the Fellowship Council on the status of hernia and abdominal wall fellowships. So please forgive me since these are not my slides, and full disclosure, I'm not as funny as Dr. Greenberg is, so hopefully this won't be a disappointment to anybody. But I do have some more hair, so hopefully that'll make up for my lack of humor. Hold on one second, let me get here into presenter mode. So these are Dr. Greenberg's disclosures. I think the most relevant one is the fact that he's the fellowship or the AHS representative to the Fellowship Council. And so I think what we're really trying to say with the new fellowship designation for hernia is that hernia surgery's changed so much, right? And so for the current American Board of Surgery qualifications, really the only number of hernia cases you really need is 85. And with the growing number and expansion of techniques, we've sort of touched on some of them today, but it's not necessarily the same as hernia surgery was exactly 20 years ago. I think there's multiple ways to tackle even just a small 2 to 3 centimeter hernia. And I think if you were to poll the audience, you may get varying different answers in surgical decision making about some of these different techniques. So I think we also see now increasing complexity. We fix really, really hard hernias. And I think before in the past, we used to say no to a lot of these patients. But as our understanding of the disease has progressed, I think so has our ability to technically fix and take care of complex patients. And so with that, I think hernia has really become its own subspecialty within minimally invasive surgery. And so currently for advanced GI and MIS fellowships, you can see these defined case requirements and categories. And even though hernia is separated out, the numbers are definitely much smaller than probably what would be required to take care of really complex hernia patients. And so I think the point of this is if you were to graduate a general surgery residency and to do a fellowship, really as a finished fellow, potentially you could only have 105 hernia cases based on requirements. But I think now with the new hernia and ab wall designation for fellowship, this is completely changed. So it's not only a numbers requirement, but I think the types of procedures have also been separated out a little bit more specifically so that hopefully applicants and fellows can be graduated and more able to take care of complex and atypical hernias that you may only see at several specialized places throughout the United States. Along with this, I think this was a pilot study in 23 and 2024, and now full implementation of the new designation starting in this upcoming academic year. And so currently, as we had kind of talked about before, there's really only 2 program designations with this hernia and ab wall fellowship program at the Cleveland Clinic and at Penn State. So Dr. Beth, I'm sure, and Dr. Chang can kind of talk about that a little bit more specifically if people have questions at the end. And so as a part of this new hernia designation, there is a competency-based curriculum that's implemented in this as well, where fellows are expected to do entrustable professional activities within several key domains for patient care. So complex hernia, loss of domain, growing hernias, peristomals, inguinal scrotals, recurrent ventral hernias, midline incisional, contaminated hernias, sort of non-midline hernias as well. So very, very specific designations that you have to learn how to take care of. And so as you can see, there's many different categories. And as a part of this fellowship education, we really expect graduating fellows to be able to take care of these complex cases and be very proficient and practice ready. So with that, I think really there's going to probably be many changes made to hernia in the future. I think some of these changes are still coming down the pipeline, so it's really hard to know exactly when they will be implemented. But I do think in the future, there probably will be some sort of certification criteria for complex abdominal wall surgery and maybe some sort of certificate or hospital privileges needed to do certain types of cases. I think currently that doesn't really exist now, but I do foresee that potentially this could be something that happens in the future. I definitely think there could also be certifications from SAGES or the American Hernia Society that will exist in the future to discuss, who meets and fulfills those training criteria and who will be earning these particular certificates. So I think currently right now, this isn't available yet, but it will be in the future. And so stay tuned and posted on what this potentially could be. So hopefully this is a good representation of what Dr. Greenberg was planning to talk about. But, I think his general message is the future of hernia surgery is bright. I think all of us believe that, or else we wouldn't really be here today talking about something that we really love and obviously a specialty that we all share. So this is his email. He wanted me to let everyone know to please reach out to him if you have any specific questions about his presentation or some of the fellowship changes. I'm sorry he couldn't be here in person today, but if you also have any other questions in the chat, I'm happy to relay that to him. So I know we're running a little bit short on time, but I do want to get to some questions that I think were submitted beforehand and also just placed in the chat. So I'm going to have all the panelists and speakers maybe turn on their videos really quickly, and we can sort of go through some of the questions. So I think Dr. Grasso asked one about hospital contracts. I think there have already been some answers in the chat, but I think maybe that's a great one to start off with is, you know, as you're getting your contract for your first job, did everybody on the panel have somebody else review it? If so, who reviewed it? And then if you requested changes, what sort of changes were you asking for? And as Dr. Schlosser may have said, not all the changes are negotiable. So how did everybody sort of approach this?
Yeah, I can start because I brought this up. So I think there's a couple of things that you made good points about. And one is the official contract. And like Katie mentioned in the chat, some things they'll tell you are just quote non-negotiable, but there are usually, 10 to 20% of things that are. Personally, I had my fellowship director at the time review my contract, as well as an attorney, more just for the basic things that are kind of for all of the physicians. I did have a separate like addendum, I guess, that we signed that talked about call pay. And that was separate from our contract because the contract was, generic for all the physicians, not just surgeons, and also not just people taking call. But I did also mention in the chat that I think some small things, if like you're not really sure if they're important or not, just have them at least even in an email, just some kind of form of written communication I think is important. Because you may not be getting the information from the person who actually has the ability to give you that information always. So it's just important that everyone's on.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I can
think
add
that's
to
really
that.
great advice. Yeah, go ahead, Katie.
Yeah, I can add to that because I'm pretty recently signed. The negotiable, I did have a lawyer look over it, and the lawyer did not flag anything really that I hadn't flagged. However, it was extremely helpful because their language is very different than ours. And so it was actually really helpful having a legal interpreter for some of the stuff that I was signing for. So things like some of the non-compete stuff that really wasn't negotiable, at least I know what's there as I kind of go into something in the future. So I found it helpful, even though it didn't make major changes. And then things that I did look at was, where do I have privileges? And so I asked for a lot of sort of associated hospital privileges just off the bat. That gave me flexibility, that helps me network. And I asked for specific goals. Like, you say you are hiring me for this. I want it in writing that you're hiring me for this, because that helps me and has helped me sort of set boundaries on what I am covering and what I do want to do, because it's already in my contract and we kind of laid that down. And so that was in like the 2-page addendum, and there was like a 30-page you're a physician at this major academic institution portion of it. That was pretty generic. That was not really negotiable.
Yeah, that's pretty, there's often like what they call the body of the contract, and the body of the contract is typically not negotiable. It's what every single physician or agrees to that works there. And those things are often not negotiable. And then you get the appendices or the addendums. And those are the ones that typically you can, and those are things going to be like your salary. Those are kind of like the additional items that will be vary from person to person. And those are often a little bit negotiable. But there's the body of it is usually not. And just to give you an idea, the Cleveland Clinic, the contract is about 3 paragraphs. It's less than 1 page. And it is the most vague thing I have ever seen in my life. I mean, they could fire me tomorrow for no reason. I could quit tomorrow, not show up to work. It is the most unbelievable contract I've ever seen. I've never seen one like it. It's crazy.
I feel like that's just a power play. Just be like, sign it. Might be good for you.
Yeah, they're like, whatever. You want to come work? Sure.
Yeah, and I think this speaks to the fact that, every organization, institution will do their contracts differently. So really understanding your contract is super important. And I would also say that it's good to maybe be upfront and talk about things that may not even be in your contract. So I feel like going into my job at the University of Michigan, I knew I was going to go out on maternity leave, and just even sort of talking about that beforehand and knowing what that was going to be like and what the expectations were sort of important. Obviously, it's not anything that somebody's going to put into your contract, but I think it's also really important to kind of set those expectations, sort of build trust with who you know, where you're going to be working, because I think if you don't have that trust, or things just don't feel right, and may not necessarily be the right place. So just kind of keep that in mind. I feel like finding a job is always super stressful and hard, and I think that leads me to probably my next question for our panelists and speakers, from one of the participants, which was, you know, just starting and looking for jobs at the beginning of the fellowship year. So it's a great way to go around and find these jobs. Like, any advice for people who are currently looking, maybe just like specifically for an ab wall job, or just even for a general surgery job?
I think the biggest thing for me to realize is that I was not going to get 100% of the things that I wanted on my first swing, and I had to really prioritize what was important to me. And so for me, while I would love to do 100% hernias all the time, it was much more important for me to be supported and be in a place where I felt supported, within my community as well as within my surgical department. And so that for me really took precedence over a lot of other things. I think all of us will have certain things that are fairly non-negotiable, such as geographic location, that sort of thing. The ab wall specialty, if you are not applying for a position that is specifically listed as an ab wall position, you will be selling something to someone who doesn't know they need it. And so that, I think, is a very specific skill that you can go in and say, you know, those terrible hernias that keep coming back and you don't want to deal with, and they get fistulas, I want them, send them to me. And for your future partners, that is a huge burden off of them. And so that is actually something that you have that you can sell to people that you are interviewing with. And there's a lot of interest now in general surgeons on having that skill set on their team.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that, a little bit about maybe how to find the job too, is I think the question. And for me, I use, you know, the Sages website is good. And I think, you know, being a part of AHS, right, your mentors, it's like a lot of word of mouth, are these hernia jobs, or understanding that they actually are a hernia job, right? Like Katie said, it's really important to understand what you're getting into and make sure it matches with what you want. So, you know, I think the ACS website, the Sages website are good places to start. And then, yeah, really networking and just letting people know that you are looking, right? Let it be known, and people are willing to help you.
So I have something to add. I know this is kind of crazy, but from usually a lot of the academic jobs are posted on the job boards, so those are already pretty easy to find. But a lot of the community or smaller hospital jobs might be posted on like Practice Match or a bunch of these different job websites. So if you are interested in like a specific state or region, you can actually go on Google and type general surgery jobs in Maryland or general surgery jobs in Florida, and it will literally web crawl all those websites, and you can go through them and apply to them one by one if you want. And also you can sign up for alerts so that if a new one hits that search criteria, you'll get notified of it pretty quickly.
Yeah, and I think one last thing to add is it's never too early to start looking. So you don't have to be a fellow to start even looking for a job. Like, this can start as soon as you're like a chief resident, you know, thinking about like who it might be, thinking about where you might want to go. And I think the timeline for jobs can be very different. Like, so I think there's some people who sign for their jobs before they even become a fellow, right? With the understanding that they're going back to where they're training, or, you know, maybe they've reached out to another place where they've already got a job offer. And my general sense is, and this could be wrong, but I think most private practice jobs or non-academic jobs tend to sign much earlier than academic surgery jobs. So sometimes you may want to even start looking. And I know people in the past who've even just directly reached out to hospitals and specific surgery groups to say, hey, I'm graduating at this time. I'm looking for a job, super interested in your group. And so sometimes even cold emailing is the way to go if you know, like you want to work at a specific location at a specific hospital with a certain surgery group. So it really is never too early to start looking. I remember when I was a fellow, I was talking to Dr. Augenstein. She's like, have you started looking for jobs? This was like October. I was like, no, should I be? And she was like, yes. So I definitely think, you know, it never too early to start. I know it's just August now, but, you know, if you're planning to go to AHS, it's a great time to sort of network, meet everybody. If you have questions, I'm sure everybody on this call would be happy to like talk to you and to ask about that.
I mean, it's a long process too. I mean, from start to finish, it might be multiple months. So just because you get an interview or there might be a second, third interview, a site visit. So, you know, it takes a lot longer than you expect.
The reassuring part right now is that it seems like everybody wants a hernia surgeon, right? So in comparison to some other kind of domains of minimally invasive surgery, like if you're on this call, at least in the next couple of years, you're probably in a good place.
Yeah, I love foregut, but trying to be a foregut surgeon is super hard. All right, so it looks like there's one more question from the chat. So applying for both a formal fellowship council program versus a program that's out of the fellowship council. I think Dr. Chang sort of typed an answer into the chat already. Do you have anything else to add, Wayne, to your answer?
Not really. I mean, a lot of those, like Nowitzki's program and actually Belyansky's program now is outside of the Fellowship Council. So they're all aware of, you know, that deadline and that they're going to be vulturing applicants from one another. So they'll match before the when your rank list is finalized so that there's no you know, awkward situation where you're matched to a Fellowship Council program, but then you match with them.
Okay. Well, as we wrap up here, I'm going to give anybody a last minute chance to type any burning questions that they have. But anything else from the panelists that you would like to, any advice for our guests tonight, or anything else you'd like to tell them?
I got two things. One is, I definitely recommend anyone who's interested in these fellowships to give yourself some time to spend on the fellowship website. It is actually really excellent. It is full of information about every program. You can see historic case numbers. You can see who's on the faculty, so you could look them up and see what they're doing. You can see so many details of this. Now, it's unfortunately you can't search quite for, does it take my visa, and does it have a robot? But if you spend some time on the website, you can get most of your questions answered and you won't look like an idiot when you get to the interview. The second thing I'd like to put in is anyone attending AHS. If you are a trainee, you should have already received some emails that are letting you know some trainee specific events. You have the option to set up a meeting mentor who can meet up with you, orient you to the meeting, get you some information, just be a friendly face. There's the Hernia Olympics, there's Hernia Jeopardy, there's a bunch of stuff going on throughout the meeting. And so we're really looking forward to seeing you there.
Okay, awesome. Anybody else have any last words? Well, if not, thank you all so much for coming. It was a real pleasure to hear from all the speaker and the panelists tonight. I think a lot of really great advice. So for anybody who's interested or applying, you know, please feel free to reach out to us. We can have the organizers circulate all of our emails, all of our social media. So if you have questions, please, you know, feel free to reach out, come up to us at AHS, ask us about our experience. I think everyone on this call is super friendly and amazing to talk to. So don't be afraid to ask questions. But otherwise, in the interest of time, I'm going to let everyone go. I feel like we could talk about this probably for a really long time since we're all so passionate about this topic. But it was really great to have everyone tonight, and we'll leave it there. All right, take care, everyone. Bye.
Thanks.